that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you're dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com. And WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Let's start out with an update on the Trump train. It has been running for a little bit more than 17 months now, or coming up on 17 months. And it's made a number of scheduled stops. It went into Obamacare town and ripped it apart. No, there was not a repeal, but let's just say that Obamacare doesn't really have any teeth anymore as far as any particular restrictions or compulsions of behavior for the American electorate. The mandate is gone. At the end of the day, that was the objection, primary objection to the law. It is unconstitutional for the government to direct people to perform a volitional activity, an otherwise volitional activity. We're not talking about the states making people have car insurance. That's state government. The federal government simply can't do things like that. But that's gone. EPA regulations, the war on coal, that's over. And coal is making a comeback. Better relations with China. You can remember that China was very disrespectful of the last administration, very disrespectful of the American military that was led by the last administration. That doesn't seem to be happening, at least not as much anymore. There's stronger GDP growth. That was something that was another planned stop on the Trump train, and we have it at least 50% higher than the average GDP growth under Obama. We have an unscheduled stop on the Trump train, and that's the potential reunification of Korea. There would no longer be a South or North if things go a certain way, or simply be talking about Korea again. Not to mention there was some hostage recovery. Those were unscheduled stops on the Trump train, but very much welcome. A scheduled stop on the Trump train was the lowering of taxes and the increase in jobs. There have been more than 3 million jobs created in the 16, 17 months that Donald Trump has been president. It's just where we are. And now we come to the one that is the latest on the stops. And this was a scheduled stop. And this deals with the Iranian nuclear agreement.
U.S. President Donald Trump on Tuesday announced he would pull the U.S. out of the Iran nuclear agreement.
It is clear to me that we cannot prevent an Iranian nuclear bomb under the decaying and rotten structure of the current agreement.
The move threatens to unravel the signature foreign policy achievement of President Barack Obama, a deal that took years to hammer out. The 2015 agreement brought Iran, the U.S., and 5 world powers together in an accord that lifted sanctions on Tehran in exchange for limits on Iran's nuclear program.
This deal does remind us that when the international community stands as one, we can advance our common security.
In a statement Tuesday, President Obama called Trump's decision misguided and a serious mistake. Trump has long lambasted the nuclear agreement, calling it one of the worst deals ever signed.
The deal does nothing to constrain Iran's destabilizing activities, including its support for terrorism.
Trump on Tuesday signed an order reimposing harsh U.S. sanctions on Tehran that had been lifted as part of the nuclear deal. Shortly after Trump spoke, Iranian state television said the decision to withdraw the United States from the deal was, quote, illegal, illegitimate, and undermines international agreements. U.S. allies such as France immediately expressed their disappointment with the choice. The European Union's top diplomat, Federica Mogherini, called on the international community to stick with the Iran nuclear deal, pointing out that Iran had complied with its obligations.
The nuclear deal with Iran is crucial for the security of the region, of Europe, and of the entire world.
Trump's decision to exit the agreement is in line with his disdain for international accords. He pulled the U.S. out of a trans-Pacific trade partnership. He's threatened to drop out of the North America Free Trade Agreement and announced the U.S. would no longer participate with the Paris Climate Accords. While Trump's decision Tuesday was anticipated, the fallout remains unclear. Some security experts warned that if the deal fell apart, the UN could lose its access to Iranian nuclear sites. Tehran has threatened it could restart its enrichment program if America withdraws, but also stated it could reach an agreement with the other 5 signatories to keep the structure in place.
That was simply more progressive and globalist hand-wringing about something that doesn't really matter. When I say what doesn't really matter is whether or not the United States respects Iran. There's no reason for the United States to respect Iran. They're also hand-wringing about international agreements. Really what they're hand-wringing and moping about and crying about is the further dismantling of the Obama agenda. NAFTA is not something that came up under Obama, but Obama seemed to be in favor of it. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, that's an Obama-era issue, and that's going by the wayside. The Paris Accords, another Obama. This is about people wringing their hands among the globalist community abroad and among the progressive set, including their progressive pets of color in this country, about the Obama administration legacy being further dismantled. That's all there is. And that's all that's ever going to be. If you will recall, Donald Trump campaigned that he was going to get rid of this deal. He said it was a bad deal. And he made it very clear back in September of last year when he addressed the UN General Assembly.
We cannot let a murderous regime continue these destabilizing activities while building dangerous missiles, and we cannot abide by an agreement if it provides cover for the eventual construction of a nuclear program. The Iran deal was one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the United States has ever entered into. Frankly, that deal is an embarrassment to the United States, and I don't think you've heard the last of it, believe me. It is time for the entire world to join us in demanding that Iran's government end its pursuit of death and destruction. It is time for the regime to free all Americans and citizens of other nations that they have unjustly detained. And above all, Iran's government must stop supporting terrorists, begin serving its own people, and respect the sovereign rights of its neighbors. The entire world understands that the good people of Iran want change. And other than the vast military power of the United States, that Iran's people are what their leaders fear the most. This is what causes the regime to restrict internet access, tear down satellite dishes, shoot unarmed student protesters, and imprison political reformers. Oppressive regimes cannot endure forever, and the day will come when the people will face a choice. Will they continue down the path of poverty, bloodshed, and terror, or will the Iranian people return to the nation's proud roots as a center of civilization, culture, and wealth, where their people can be happy and prosperous once again.
Iran's president.
That's pretty clear, isn't it? This deal's not going to hang around if the Iranian government continues its work of destabilizing. Now, let's be clear. You can find other things out there and read up, and you'll find out that technically Iran seems to have followed in the steps of the agreement. However, as Donald Trump said, it's a one-sided agreement. The United States got nothing. Well, they're not going to have as many centrifuges. The idea for them to not have a dangerous nuclear program is for them to have none. None. They should not be able to enrich uranium. You don't need to enrich uranium to have a nuclear energy program. Nevertheless. Oh, about the agreement that is being torn up. National Review put out an article back on the 10th talking about the nuclear agreement not even being a signed document. From the article, how easy we forget. On November 19, 2015, the State Department issued a letter to then Representative Mike Pompeo that severely undercuts the notion that the Iran deal represents any form of binding agreement. Turns out the Obama administration not only acknowledged that the deal wasn't a treaty, but it also admitted it wasn't an executive agreement or even a signed document. Here are the key paragraphs. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action is not a treaty or an executive agreement, and is not a signed document. This is the Obama administration speaking of this to Congress. The JCPOA reflects political agreements between Iran, the P5+1, which is the U.S., the U.K., France, Germany, Russia, and China, and the European Union. As you know, the U.S. has a long-standing practice of addressing sensitive problems in negotiations that culminate in political commitments. This is nothing as far as legislative, as far as American president. It's nothing. So for Donald Trump to walk away from it is hardly a difficult thing with respect to it. It was never voted in. It's not a treaty. He's not violating anything by leaving it. And I don't care about what the UK, France, Germany, Russia, and China, and the EU think about anything. They can't get out of their own way. So who cares? Now, here's another thing that I just find interesting. And we're still talking about this one unscheduled stop. Well, this is a scheduled stop, on the Trump train. There are a lot of progressives and their pets of color who like John Kasich, governor of Ohio. He's a common sense conservative. Well, let me remind you of what he said about the Iran deal when he was candidate for president in May of 2016.
I think it's a bad agreement. I've actually been trying to get a hold of a Democrat who I think could be pivotal in this, because what I think we're going to see is we're going to see Iran get a nuclear weapon and then have loads of cash to be able to fund all of our adversaries and the adversaries of our allies in the Middle East. So I think it is a very bad deal. I am hoping that the United States Senate, first of all, I think they will vote this down, and then the question gets to be on whether they can override a presidential veto. And it's going to be a very important time for Democrats to decide what they want to do on this. And look, I've been in positions where I've had to vote against the president of my own party. I voted against U.S. troops in Lebanon. It didn't make people happy when I did it, but sometimes you've got to do the right thing, and I think this is a wrong deal at the wrong time with the wrong country.
Well, that's pretty clear, isn't it? He didn't agree with it, so I guess now he's back to being a racist Republican again because he doesn't agree with this. Let me help you out with all of this right now. The Trump train was voted on to get rid of the Obama legacy. When Obamacare, when the individual mandate went down, that took down the only domestic pillar that stood for it. Now the Iran nuclear deal is gone the way of the dodo bird. Here's the upshot from this. All this means is Barack Obama no longer politically matters in the history of the United States as anything other than a race footnote. Choo, choo. Chugga, chugga. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', will be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin, here on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com. And WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. What does a record monthly budget surplus mean? Excellent question, since in the month of April, last month, the U.S. posted its largest monthly budget surplus on record. And the Congressional Budget Office said that reflected stronger economic activity over the past year. Well, now we have an idea. And this was Bloomberg's article back on the 10th of May, U.S. posting record monthly budget surplus of $214 billion. Stronger economic activity over the past year. The past year. Gee, what has been happening over the past year except the relentless movement of the Trump train through what's left of the Obama legacy? Over the past year, we've seen more than 3 million jobs created by the U.S. economy in the private sector. Over the past year, we've seen regulations that were meant to restrict fossil fuel utilization and put other unneeded burdens upon businesses for things that don't matter to business and really don't matter to the American people, not the ones who actually produce anything. We've seen those get rolled back. We've seen a more aggressive America First foreign policy, and we've seen a relentless and consistent pulling away from international agreements that do not have the American interest at heart. Paris Accords gone. Trans-Pacific Partnership gone. And now most recently the Iran nuclear deal, although that couldn't have been part of what was going on over the past year. What you have seen is America acting in the interest of America and of Americans over the past year, and as a result, economic activity has been at least 50% higher than the average we saw over the past 8 years. Average GDP growth for the 8 years of Obama, depending on who you look to for calculations, either 1.5% or 1.8%. Average was not even 2.2%. First full year of Trump, you're looking at 2.8%. Now, is that the 3% he promised? Nope. Is it a darn sight better than what you ever got out of Barack Obama, who never touched 3%? And for everyone who says that we can't afford a tax cut, please explain to me this surplus. Let's make clear what we had. The United States government in April of 2018 took in $510 billion in receipts. That's a record. $510 billion. Remember, taxes have been cut. Where's all this money coming from? The outlays were $296 billion. The math is pretty straightforward. Let me put that in perspective, because the surplus itself is record-setting, and those records go back to 1968. But since 1980, I was able to look at this. What was the highest levels of receipts and deficits and outlays on record? Let's talk about maximum receipts. Well, this past April was the maximum. That's the highest we've ever seen, $510 billion. The highest level of outlays that we've ever seen was last June of 2017. So wait a minute, and that was $429 billion. Wait a minute. So you're telling me that we have dropped our spending by almost a third since June of last year? outlays are down by almost a third since last year at this time. See, that's what happens when the economy picks up. There's not as much need for the government to spend money on domestic stuff because the economy and the people working in it take, yeah. Some people understand this is kind of Econ 101. On the minimum side, the lowest amount of money the government has taken in since 1980 at least was in May of 1983, and that was $33.8 billion compared to $510 billion these 35 years later. The lowest amount of outlays came in January of 1982. Now let me put that in perspective for a minute. Every progressive and their pet of color I know wants to trash Ronald Reagan for running deficits. Guys, we're talking about an order of magnitude different during the Reagan years. I'm sorry. Reagan didn't cause what we've been seeing. Nowhere near. You know what else is going on here? This is an interesting thing. Since Donald Trump has been in office, the federal government has run up $893 billion of additional debt. That's where we are. We spent another $893 billion more than we've taken in since Trump has been in office, since January of 2017 inclusive. $680 billion of that was in 2017. So far, we only have $160 billion of deficits in this year. Don't get me wrong. When you start talking about billions of dollars, it's still ridiculous. But the average Obama deficit for his 8 years was $895 billion. $895 billion average. Trump is not going to get there at this rate. What's the upshot from all this? The Trump economic theory that he has managed to be able to put into policy and into law, what laws there have been passed, most notably the tax reform bill, of which I'm not a great fan from the standpoint of the individual taxpayer. They did not do enough to lower income rates. People keep forgetting when Ronald Reagan was in office, when he finished cutting taxes, there were only two income tax brackets, 15% and 28%. That was it. And that administration took in, over its 8 years, almost double the amount of money that you saw coming in under the Carter administration, the 4 years prior to that. They nearly doubled revenues. Yeah, but what about those deficits? The other side of deficits is that, you know what, this is the thing that's crazy to me. If you went from making $50,000 a year to $200,000 a year the next year, and you still had new debt, is the problem you're earning or is the problem you're spending? Ronald Reagan couldn't catch a break because he still had a Democrat Congress which wasn't about to let new money go unspent and wasn't about to let anybody know Democrats understood that taxation or lower taxation produced more money. They just spent more than they needed to on things that weren't necessary because at the time the deficits and the debts were not anywhere near as significant, and we could manage them and they could continue the political intrigue and lying. We're not there anymore. We're heading toward $21 trillion in debt. A far cry from the single-digit billions, and less than 5, for that matter, of the Reagan years. But the principle is still the same. if you fix the economy, you can take care of debt. Growth cures some things. Growth cures some things. Democrats know that. But if economic growth is strong in America, need for progressive government activism is not strong in America. And if there is no need or less need for progressive government activism, please explain to me what role in life, what purpose does the Democrat Party serve? They have no agenda. In case you haven't noticed, they have no positive agenda for the American people. They still don't have one. They've tried to come up with one. They don't know how to do it. Donald Trump has an agenda, and it's working. So now we have record budget surplus for 1 month and a declining trend on budget deficits. How do you think that's going to play in 2020? All because we turned loose the American economy and took off a number of the progressive constraints. That's what happens when you have record monthly budget surpluses. The only way you get there is you turn loose the American economy, and that includes cutting taxes, and everybody in Washington, D.C. knows it. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Congress, both houses of Congress, have now chosen lending equity in the purchase of automobiles. And the left, or at least the media in the left, not to mention the political left, is criticizing them for it. What am I talking about? New York Times report on May 8th. And the title is innocuous enough. House votes to dismantle bias rule in auto lending. Oh, okay, so we're not going to have a rule for bias in auto lending. That sounds like it might be pretty good, but of course there's always something more to it. The Republican regulatory rollback took a step forward as the House voted to scrap an Obama-era rule intended to prevent discrimination by auto lenders as lawmakers inch closer to a bipartisan agreement to alter portions of the 2010 Dodd-Frank Act. If you know anything about the 2010 Dodd-Frank Act, you want that thing gone almost as much as you would want Obamacare gone. It is an abomination. The other thing I'm noticing is the more news comes out, the more you see parts of the Obama legacy getting sucked into the drain. The biggest thing that happened over the last week, of course, was the Iran deal is now basically gone. It's gone. But Obamacare is neutered. Dodd-Frank would be another huge blow. If Dodd-Frank goes and it's on its way, because what's happening with Dodd-Frank is the same thing that happened with Obamacare. You couldn't go after the law itself until you dealt with regulations that were enacted by agencies to enact the law. You get rid of those. It's kind of like taking the branches off a tree that you're going to cut down. That's kind of what's going on here. In a vote of 234 to 175, which meant there were some Democrats over there voting for this thing, the House nullified 2013 guidance issued by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau aimed at preventing auto lenders from charging minorities higher fees when taking out car loans. That move followed a similar vote in the Senate in April to void the anti-discrimination guidance, and the resolution will now go to President Trump, who is expected to sign it. So, what are you saying? Well, they're going to let them discriminate against minorities. You're assuming that this discrimination is actually occurring. Well, I know so-and-so. Really? They got a higher rate than the white guy who went in there. Oh, and that was because of their color. It had to be. Really? Okay. Let me bring something to your attention here. This is from the article with the New York Times. The Center for Responsible Lending analyzed loan level data in 2011, 7 years ago. Interesting. And found that Black and Latino consumers were receiving higher numbers of interest rate markups on their car loans than white customers. Stop right there. The interesting thing about this article that the New York Times ran was when they said the Center for Responsible Lending and put that in print, they actually gave you a hyperlink to the report they were speaking of. Isn't that special? Of course, they don't expect anybody to actually read that thing, but they don't know me that well. I actually clicked on that link and I looked at the report. And it's a fascinating report. It is called, Under the Hood, Auto Loan Interest Rate Hikes Inflate Consumer Costs and Loan Losses. Wow. Here are the findings. There were 3 major findings from this report. I'm going to let you know what they are. Finding number 1, consumers who finance cars through a dealership will pay over $25.8 billion in interest rate markups over the lives of their loan. Wow. In other words, join a credit union and use their auto loan rates. That was their first finding. Didn't say anything. It said consumers. Didn't say white consumers. Didn't say black. That was finding number 1. Finding number 2, we got to get these evil racists. Dealers tend to mark up interest rates more for borrowers with weaker credit. Let me help you out with how evil the New York Times is. They went and found that blacks and Latinos have poorer credit scores than whites. And that is their basis, but that's not what this report says. Let me read that to you again. Dealers tend to mark up interest rates more for borrowers with weaker credit, which kind of makes sense. The bigger risk you are, people know that, the higher interest rate people are going to charge because they don't know if they're going to get their money out of you. Finding number 3. Rate markups are a strong driver of default and repossession among subprime borrowers. In other words, the higher interest you charge somebody, the more likely it is for them to default and have their vehicles repossessed. So it's kind of self-defeating, but it's unlikely to change. You're not going to charge the folks who have the worst credit the same low rates that you're going to charge people who actually pay money back. That's not going to work. But in none of this do you see a reference to white, Latinos, blacks. Let me tell you, I just did a word search on it. The word race shows up in this report one time, and it's not in the body of the report. When you look up the endnotes, it's part of the title for one of the articles that they researched as part of this report. They didn't mention it. Race is not part of their report. It's part of the New York Times conclusive as opposed to objective reporting. So they and the Democrats are saying it's about race. The Republicans and those Democrats who went along with them because it was bipartisan vote in both the House and the Senate said, you know what, we've been down this road where the government got all up in lenders' business And we ended up with a great recession when we did that before with housing. We really don't need to do that again with auto lenders. I think they got this thing under control, so we're just gonna let the federal government get out the way. Because besides, we have some other issues with this Dodd-Frank thing, and we don't need these little branches to be hanging around if we decide to cut down that tree. Do you understand that people lie to you and call themselves responsible journalists? I mean, flat out lie. This is another race-based lie. Are you paying attention yet to what's going on? Because if you're not, this is going to continue. I mean, it really is. So let me kind of recap something for you. The House and Senate have gotten together in a bipartisan manner and said those rules we put in place to try to stop racial discrimination in auto loans, that's not the way we should be doing things. Well, if you take it out, there's going to be discrimination. That is what the white progressives in government and media and every one of their pets of color are always going to say. If you don't make them do right, they won't do right. Okay. Let me just go ahead and say it flat out. If you need the government to get good treatment for you in this day and time in 2018, then you are either an illegal immigrant, a homosexual, or a testosterone-free black man. Because nobody else needs that type of help. People want to be recognized. I'm sorry, this is the way it is. People would rather be recognized and get good things to happen for them because of how they conduct their lives, rather than the government intervening for them on the basis of their skin color or life choices, so to speak. You want to buy something on credit? Get a job, make money, pay your bills on time. People will say you're a good credit risk, and they'll give you the best rates they can. Period. End of sentence. End of everything. Don't do it, and you're going to have a problem. And that's all there is to it. Instead of promoting that, which is one of the tenets of Americanism, if you really want to think about it, the New York Times would rather say that the only way that Latinos and blacks can get a fair shake when it comes to buying a car is not to have a good credit score, but to have the government come in and make sure that auto lenders don't mark things up for them that they wouldn't mark up for white folks, as though white folks with bad credit are getting better interest rates. Yeah, I know they are. Really? So you've pulled this out and you've looked at entire risk profiles for No, you haven't. You haven't. This is not what you think it is. It never has been what you think it is. And they're lying to you. My question is, are you going to recognize this? Because they just begun to lie. We're not close to election time yet. When the real lying is going to begin, if you don't recognize these lies in May, you're going to have a hard time deciphering them as we get into October and early November. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 FM, North Florida Talk Radio. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com. And WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Last segment of the first hour of the show, the progressives continue to take dead aim, at the liberty that is afforded American citizens by the Electoral College. There has been a great deal of effort, and it's not recent. Let me help you out with something. Progressives have been going after the Constitution in meaningful ways since before the Civil War. As a matter of fact, Amendments 13 through 15 are a direct assault on individual liberty under the guise of race, and the white progressives will not admit it, and their pets of color are too ignorant to understand it. Yes, I said that. If you understood what the Constitution was about and how it worked to protect freedom, you would look to repeal, likely, Amendments 13, 14, and 15. But I digress. I can hear him now. If you get rid of the 13th Amendment, we're going to be back in slavery. Slavery was not legal in any state in the Union even before the 13th Amendment was ratified. They had eliminated it in every state in the Union before the 1863. People don't think, but I digress. Back to the Electoral College. Before you can talk intelligently about the Electoral College, it helps to have an explanation, because I find that not everybody has a clear understanding of what the Electoral College is. They just have heard somebody say something negative about it, and therefore they're against it too. News Direct put together an audio back in July of 2016 prior to the election to give a very brief explanation of the Electoral College.
The Electoral College isn't a college that decides if you get a diploma, but it does decide if you get to be President of the United States. In the United States, citizens over the age of 18 can vote in presidential elections. This is called the popular vote. But it's the Electoral College that actually chooses the president. And you need 270 electoral votes to become president. The Founding Fathers created the Electoral College because they worried states with smaller populations might not get fairly represented. They also didn't think the common man was informed enough to choose a suitable president. So they created the Electoral College. Today it has 538 members. That's one for every member of the House of Representatives and Senate, representing all 50 states. In addition, Washington, D.C. has 3 Electoral College members. To win the presidency, you must win at least 270 electoral votes. And to win electoral votes, for the most part, you need to win the popular vote in each state. By winning California's popular vote, you take home the state's 55 electoral votes. And if you win the popular vote in Texas, you win that state's 38 electoral votes. This is called a winner-take-all system. But sometimes a candidate wins the popular vote nationally, but doesn't amass enough electoral votes. This happened in 2000. Democratic candidate Al Gore won the popular vote nationwide, yet Republican George W. Bush won Florida in a close contest. That was enough to give him the electoral vote victory. Only 4 times in America's history has the popular vote been different from the electoral vote.
As short as that was, that's actually very rich. Let's talk about that last point. 4 times in American history has the popular vote failed to result in an elected president. We saw 2 of those within the last 20 years. The 2000 election with Bush and Gore, the 2016 election with Trump and Clinton, and another one of note, because I can't recall the 4th one, of note was the 1860 election. Abraham Lincoln did not win the popular vote. I don't know that anybody is going to question that Abraham Lincoln was a bad president. I'm not a person who thinks that George W. Bush was a bad president for 6 of the 8 years he was president. After 2006, he could have mailed all that in. But up until that point, I thought he did a reasonably good job. Now, another thing. Why do you have an electoral college in the first place? To protect the interests of the minority. Because if this simply becomes a democracy, which the founders took great pains not to give the American people, then smaller states would never matter. Their opinions, their interests would never be heard. They'd be swallowed up by the interests of others. That's why the Senate was set up the way it is, so that one senator from one state could prevent legislation for the whole nation if it was going to impact his state. You had to get everybody on board. That's why all states, no matter their size, have 2 senators to prevent majority rule or mob rule from overriding the interests of individuals, at least individual states. Another point that came out in that audio was the founders did not want the common man, didn't think he had the the educational or the knowledge or the intelligence per se to choose a president. So they had to put a buffer in there. And that was to say, all right, you guys can vote, and then we're going to basically put this decision into the hands of other people that we're going to choose as a result of your voting, and they will have a charter, they will have a commitment to do certain things, but at the end of the day, they need to do what they believe is best for the country and best for the state, to be honest. What's best for the state? The progressive movement wants democracy badly. And that's one of the reasons they have compromised education in this country so much. They want an uneducated electorate. We've been calling them low information voters for quite some time now. That is actually part of the overall progressive plan. They don't value education. They value indoctrination. They want everyone to think a particular way, then they want to turn them loose and have them vote and then validate their particular opinions by an election the same way that North Korea does, the same way that Saddam Hussein did, the same way that Joseph Stalin did. It's not about whether or not you had a free election. It's about whether or not you were free to vote your conscience. And in a lot of these so-called democracies, good luck with that. Now, most recently, and I bring this up because most recently we had this development.
Connecticut State Senate has just passed a bill that will allow the state to give its electoral college votes to the presidential candidate who wins the popular vote. The vote passed 21-14 to join the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, which already includes 10 states and the District of Columbia. According to the Huffington Post, Connecticut Governor Daniel Malloy describes the current electoral college voting system as fundamentally unfair, being that with the exception of the presidency, every elected office in the country is awarded the candidate who receives the most votes. He promises to sign the legislation committing his state to the interstate agreement. Once he does so, the compact will have 172 of the 270 electoral votes a candidate needs to win the presidency. In 2016, Donald Trump lost the popular vote by almost 3 million ballots, but won the electoral vote 304 to 227, thus winning the presidency. According to the Associated Press, Connecticut, which cast its 7 electoral votes for Hillary Clinton, will be the first state to join the National Popular Vote Agreement since Trump's win in 2016.
First state to join this compact since the election of 2016. So progressives have been at this for a while. If you really understand anything about the progressive movement and all the name changes they've gone through back and forth, mostly between liberal and progressive as terminology, you would understand that they've been at this for a while. The progressive idea of breaking down constitutional authority to basically impose their will instead of allow people to make up their own minds goes all the way back to the ratification of Amendments 13 through 15, which actually worked to trump the 10th Amendment. We've had this problem for a while with progressives. And now what they have is with Connecticut, they now have 172 electoral votes. Here's the good news about that, those of us who like liberty. The 172 votes that they now have in their compact were won by the Democrats anyway. Hawaii, California, Washington, Illinois, Vermont, New York, Massachusetts, now Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Maryland, and D.C. They got those anyway. They don't have anything that they didn't already have. That's the good news. The bad news is that you have to worry about what else they're going to do. Now, here's the other thing for the pets of color of the white progressives. When you look at this, here's some things you haven't thought about. If we go to a totally popular vote for the President of the United States, what good is the Voting Rights Act? Because now the votes of those in black folks and other minorities and states, what difference does it make if they vote? And what happens when minorities say we vote one way and we can show that we voted one way, but the legislature just took our votes and cast them for somebody else? How is that not a violation of the Voting Rights Act? I'm wondering. Now, whether or not Congress would approve something like this, which I believe it does require, because it's being argued that it requires perhaps it requires congressional approval. That's not going to get through a Republican House and Senate. And we've had a Republican House and or Senate for most of the last 24 years. Nevertheless, you need to understand what's going on. They are out to take your vote since they cannot win your vote. They are out to remove the republic that they cannot control and replace it with a democracy that they believe they can. And once that occurs, you will have no liberty whatsoever. This is why the Electoral College, being maintained in its current construction, matters. And to be honest with you, it would make better sense to make it even more dramatic and say, you know what, you need to win every one of those congressional districts and have each one of those represent an electoral vote, which they do. And until that occurs, liberty is always going to be hanging in the balance. I'm going to turn this over to my good friend Ron Edwards, and after that we'll be back with hour 2 of Black Man Thinking.
Sponsored by the Tri-County Liberty Coalition.
Once again, President Trump showed real leadership, wisdom, and moxie by pulling America out of the Obama executive order nuclear deal with Iran. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards. On today's page from the Edwards Notebook, for 39 years, Iran has been shouting death to America and Israel. Iran has for too long been given free reign by American presidents, while that Islamic nation took over a U.S. embassy, financially supported Hezbollah, and blew up a U.S. Marine base. More recently, Iran frantically worked to try and produce nuclear missiles, which they threatened to utilize to blow up targets in both the United States and Israel. So along came President Obama, who through executive order enacted a nuclear arms deal without congressional approval, nor agreed to by Iran's neighbors. If that deal were allowed to run its course, Iran would be free and clear to produce nuclear weapons after a decade. One has to wonder, since inspectors were prevented from making sure that Iran stuck to the so-called agreement, if they weren't still creating nuclear weapons. The days of America leading from behind are over. The world will benefit from the wisdom of getting out of the deal and slapping a tough economic sanction on Iran. I'm Ron Edwards.
Blowing away the myths and revealing the truth. You can continue to blow away the myths with Ron Edwards on theronedwards.com. Sponsored by the Tri-County Liberty Coalition.
Ron Edwards, the new voice of America.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you're dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problems. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy with Hour 2 of Black Man Thinkin on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1, FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5, North Florida Talk Radio. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Let's tell the truth a little bit. And in this particular, or on this particular occasion, I'm talking about the graduation ceremony at the University of Florida back on the first weekend in May, actually. You have heard, and there have been video snippets all over social media and elsewhere on the internet, that minority students were rushed across the stage and were manhandled, and there were, of course, microphones shoved in their face along with cameras so they could sit there and tell their tale of woe. And, of course, this was terribly racist. And then, of course, the president of the university came back and he made phone calls, personal phone calls to 21 students, and went on the next day, because the graduation was a multi-day event, and talked about how sorry he was and how this is not the way they want to do things here. Yeah, okay, I get it. It's malarkey. But it is another example of what goes on with the progressive left and manipulation of race themes. Let's tell these things in order. Here is the fact. Students who emphasize themselves during the commencement ceremony, where the whole idea is to let everybody walk across the stage to get their diploma, students who emphasize themselves were not allowed to do so. They were grabbed and moved along so that the procession could continue to flow. Here is the lie, that only minority students were rushed. Here's the truth. Whites got the same treatment. If you decided to take this occasion on which they're trying to move quite a few people through a graduation ceremony, and all these families have come together just to see their family member, all these families come together to see their one family member get the opportunity to walk out there with a cap and gown in front of all these people and get their diploma. Let me tell you what they don't want to see. I don't want to see Shaniqua and her dancing routine on high heels. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see Wilbur doing a backflip. I don't want to see any of that. I'm there to see my kid walk across the stage, and I'm there to tolerate your kid doing the same. If everybody respects everybody else, then you might actually have a commencement ceremony that doesn't last half a day. But what you have are selfish people who I want to let everybody know. Everybody does know. They can read your name. Your name is called. And if you do things decently and in order, you just walk out there, people know it's you, they can say their applause, and then when you get yours, they can say and do applause for the next person. It is about unselfishness. To illustrate my point, the ABC affiliate in that area did, on May 6th, they did a story on what had happened the day before, and they filed this report.
We start tonight with a story that's making national headlines. University of Florida President Kent Fox made personal calls and left voicemails for 21 graduates over the weekend.
He's apologizing for the behavior of a faculty member seen pushing students across the stage. TV20's Crystal Bailey spoke to two of the students who received one of those voicemails.
Imagine working 4 years for your degree and wanting to celebrate the moment you get that diploma on stage, but someone takes that moment away from you. 2 students feel that way after this weekend's graduation ceremonies.
I had planned to do a dance on stage and to celebrate this joyous occasion.
Nafisa Atta, seen in this video, being pushed across the stage before she has the chance to salute her sorority at UF.
And he pushed me forward, and then I kind of lost my footing a little bit, and then I also lost my cap in the process of it.
Oliver Telusma is also one of the graduates who was pushed at Saturday's graduation, left with this voicemail.
I'm just appalled that we did this to you, and I personally apologize that this happened at the very time that we all should be celebrating your accomplishments.
I think his response is too little too late, very reactionary.
He was sitting on stage, but he didn't do anything to intervene.
President Fox saying on Sunday it won't happen again.
I want you all, our students, to know that we've changed that practice, and we also want each one of you to know that we celebrate you, your graduation, and your accomplishments.
But I definitely feel like a lot more black students were targeted in this than our white students who did other moves and dance moves such as backflipping or taking selfies on stage but didn't receive the same aggressive treatment.
There's a video of what looks like a white woman being pushed as well, but Atta says the man was more aggressive with minority students.
Looking back after the fact, it's kind of embarrassing that that's my memory of college commencement here at UF.
University representatives aren't saying who the faculty member involved is.
We have asked our human resources and also this individual's college to investigate and to take appropriate action.
We have yet to hear what that action will be. Crystal Bailey, TV20 News.
My first reaction is to laugh out loud. I have been through multiple graduations in my time. I went through my high school graduation. I went through my college graduation. I went through my graduation ceremony for my master's degree. And at every one of those ceremonies, everyone who was going through commencement, everyone who was receiving a degree, high school degree, college degree, master's degree, whatever, you were told to keep it moving. This is not your time to go out on the stage and have a show. You are there. There are people before you. There are people coming after you. There are families from all over the city. If you're in a high school, you have family coming in out of state even for high school graduations. You definitely have family coming in from out of state for any college graduation, and the same thing for masters. So you have a bunch of families there. You have a number of people you're trying to get through. And the last thing we want to do is have this drag on all day long. You want to celebrate. The idea of celebrating is let everybody get their diploma, let everybody get their degree, let everybody get their moment of recognition, get the handshake and the picture, and then you go celebrate with whomever you wish once we commit you to the world. Throw your cap in the air and go off and do whatever you want to do. It is selfish, it is ignorant, it is rude for you to take your moments, which should not intrude on anyone else's time, and try to put a spotlight on yourself. Let me get back to something specific from this story. You heard it, but you didn't hear it very much because they didn't focus on it. But at least being a local affiliate, they did bother to put it out there. This is what the woman said. I feel like a lot more black students were targeted rather than our white students who did other moves such as backflipping or taking selfies on stage but didn't receive the same aggressive treatment. She didn't say that whites did not receive it, were not rushed. She's talking about aggressive treatment. Well, you were trying to stop and do a dance, young lady, and that was broken up. No, we're not doing that. Well, what about the guy who did a backflip? I don't think that takes a lot of time. And guess what? I guarantee you somebody was there to make sure he didn't do a second one. There is a video, back to the article. There is a video of what looks like a white woman, it was, being pushed as well. But the black girl, Atta, said the man was more aggressive with minority students. Really? That's an opinion. That's not reporting. Looking back after the fact, it's kind of embarrassing that this is my memory of my college commencement at UF. That's what Toulousma, the gentleman who was being interviewed for this story, said. Well, it's embarrassing because you acted a fool and they didn't allow it. Your moment should have been after the graduation. You could have walked out there, held up a hand and raised and salute and doing all that. Just keep it moving. Keep it moving. But what you have to recognize is this is your current university environment. These are the same universities, by the way, that forced out the president and the chancellor at the University of Missouri in 2015. This story here from the Washington Post. University of Missouri president and chancellor resigned over handling of racial incidents. Wow, what a surprise. After weeks of escalating student protests and the threat of a football team boycott, the president of the University of Missouri, that system, resigned, forced out amid complaints that he had done too little to address racism and other ugly incidents on campus. Chancellor R. Bowen Lofton, who oversees the university's main campus in Columbia, also will step down. The university system's governing body, the Board of Curators, announced. Lofton plans to leave his position at the end of the year and move to a new role within the university as director for research facility development. You may remember, of course you won't now, that the homosexual black president of the Student Government Association there lied about racists being on campus, driving through, and disrupting things on campus. And that was part of this whole thing that wasn't handled properly by the president, a black homosexual man lying about white supremacist activity. And they didn't cave. This is part of a strategy. You can't have disruption in this country the way you really want to unless and until you engage race, because black folks will act a fool if you tell them they are being discriminated against. Again, this is the same university system, bunch of folks who turned a blind eye to intimidation by black students at the University of Dartmouth when they went through the library screaming at white students, pinning them up against walls, yelling in their faces. And there was no repercussion because Black Lives Matter. You understand. At Cal State LA offers segregated housing for black students. Went through all that trouble through the 1950s and 60s to try to end racial segregation in America, and progressives want to bring it back, not through white folks, but now through black folks. This is university. Understand this, the progressive drive to divide continues, and it's going to be powered by every racial lie that they can craft. And the interesting thing about it is they are always going to portray blacks as weak sisters who need to be protected from the evil white man. If you're really black, and I am, that's insulting. If you're not insulted and you claim to be black, you're not worth a bucket of warm spit. I don't need for someone to try to make me equal to a white person. I was beyond equal when I came out of the womb. I don't need any help from white people to beat anybody white. They might need some help to beat me. In either case, let's have the competition. I don't need a level playing field. I just need to know where the field is. I'll figure out my own way to win. But that's not what progressives think of black people, and you are simply willing pawns in their scheme, which is to bring down the country with you as a lever, and then they'll simply step on you and keep moving to the next objective. You don't mean anything to them. They're using you to get at somebody else, and you don't see it. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, talkamericaradio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com. WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, we have more Negro anti-police foolishness and the, predictable, hypocritical aftermath. You will probably by now be aware that there was a woman, 65-year-old grandmother, that's how she's being described, in Alpharetta, Georgia. She was arrested, pulled over for a minor traffic violation, and had a problem with accepting the ticket from the officer. NBC News actually reported on this on May 11th in this regard, and cover your ears for the first part of this audio.
The 65-year-old grandmother wailing in this dashcam video had just been pulled over by police in Alpharetta, Georgia. It took 6 officers to take Rose Campbell into custody.
I'm so hurt.
The incident starts calmly, with the first officer telling Campbell that he's stopping her because she swerved onto another lane. She refuses to sign the ticket. The encounter escalates. The third officer using strong language. As backup arrives, she's pulled out of the vehicle. Then they restrain her. That third officer, James Legg, was suspended.
Apparently lost his cool and his temper and acted inappropriately both with his words and with his actions.
Today, Legg resigned. In a letter he writes, "I feel I acted appropriately in the way that I was trained." But he adds, maybe I should not have used profanity.
There's an old saying that says, treat others like you want to be treated. That's the bottom line.
Tonight, Campbell's pleaded guilty to disorderly conduct as the department promises an internal investigation. Gabe Gutierrez, NBC News, Atlanta.
Let's deal with Rose Campbell, also known as Medea. And let's back up. She pled guilty to disorderly conduct. Oh, really? Well, she was charged with disorderly conduct very early in the encounter. Now, they say it took 6 police to... No, it didn't take 6 police. The only reason 6 police were used, yes, they could have handled an unruly 65-year-old woman with 1 or 2 officers. But then when she resisted arrest, she would have been taken to the ground, and that would have added a whole nother level of drama to this foolishness. The third officer resigned, saying maybe he shouldn't have used profanity. Let me get this straight. What you're going to tell me is that a police officer should not use profanity when he's dealing with someone who's resisting arrest. I wonder how many police officers across this country daily might slip up and use profanity when dealing with someone who is challenging their authority to take them into custody. That time-honored tradition among the pets of color of white progressives known as resisting arrest. Nobody ever curses at someone who resists arrest. I can't imagine that they would do that, right? Give me a break. Here's how it breaks down. She's driving. She commits a minor traffic violation, but large enough for someone to say, you know what, we need to stop this, pull her over. Pull her over, wants to give her a citation. She refuses to sign. Refuses to sign. And starts calling for a supervisor over a traffic ticket? Are you serious? Screaming for a where's my supervisor, you can hear her say in other parts of the encounter. Like she owns one, I guess. So let me remind some people about the traffic laws in Georgia. There's a few law offices that have that up there. Georgia traffic law. What is a traffic ticket? A traffic ticket is a citation or summons issued to a person who has violated a motor vehicle law. The citation or summons, which is issued by a police officer or other authorized representative of the government, is an order to appear in court before a judge or magistrate. After being issued the citation or summons, the person accused of violating the law can remain free pending his or her need to appear in court. They have a couple of questions down here, and it's really, to me, it's funny. Here's the relevant question. What could happen if a police officer wanted me to sign a traffic ticket and I refused? The traffic ticket, here's the answer, the traffic ticket contains an actual notice to you of a pending court date at which you must appear. By signing the ticket, you are providing an acknowledgement of receipt of the notice to appear. Since the officer is charging you with a violation of law, he could take you into custody. By signing the traffic ticket, you avoid being taken into custody at that time and are released on your own recognizance pending the court date. It is better to sign the traffic ticket and go about your business pending the court date. By signing the traffic ticket, you remain free and retain the right to show up at the hearing to contest the issuance of the citation or summons. Translation: you're not guilty of anything because you get a traffic ticket. You are given a date to go and contest whether or not you should have gotten the ticket. I've gotten tickets. I've beaten tickets in court. I know a bunch of other people who've done the same thing. But what is the wisdom of telling the cop, I'm not going to sign this ticket, get me a supervisor? What makes you think you have a right to a supervisor over a traffic ticket? You're just being told you need to show up in court and tell somebody why you shouldn't be found guilty of what the officer accused you of driving. Go on about your business and deal with it on that date. Get yourself some evidence. Demonstrate that he was wrong. Because you can beat traffic tickets, but she didn't do that. And again, 6 officers? Of course. Because the police are conscious of their reputation. And they know that if you get Medea here fighting with 2 officers and they got to take her to the ground, either to get her out of the car or tase her or something like that, because she obviously thought she was a match for everybody, because it took at least 3 officers to pull her out of the car without harming her. And let's not forget, not only did she invite herself getting arrested for the traffic violation, she has pleaded guilty to disorderly conduct. I have no sympathy for the woman. None. When you bring upon yourself a problem that didn't have to happen, and you're supposed to be old enough to know better, 65-year-old grandmother, why are you out there doing disorderly conduct at 65 years old at night? What is your problem? Why are you doing disorderly conduct? Why are you sitting up here asking for a supervisor over a minor traffic ticket? And why is half the dang country trying to find fault with the police for this woman's absolute negrosity foolishness? That's just silly. Take the ticket, complain all you want, sign the ticket, talk about the officer as much as you want to, as bad as you please. They've heard it all. Sign the ticket and move on. You can curse at the, you can sign the ticket, take it, you can tear it up and do everything else you want to. But what purpose does it possibly serve to act a fool on the side of the street? Because that's what she did. Well, they can treat anybody that, yeah, they can treat anybody that way who's dumb enough to not take the citation and thereby go free on their own recognizance. That's what happens. Doesn't have to. And all this is part of the way it's being played, not the incident, because incidents like this happen every day, but the way this was being played up, finding so, oh wow, she's a great candidate, but she's old and black, and she was screaming all the good things, and they did this, that, and the other. So the effort to separate the public from the police due to race-powered ignorance is continuing on schedule. They're going to find another one. This week of May, it's her. Not that long ago, it was Stephon Clark who sat up and ran from the cops and got himself shot. There's going to be another one. It will continue because it is part of a deliberate campaign. They cherry-pick the stories. They have stories every day of white people who go through changes. They never seem to make the news. You have stories of Hispanic people who have it. They don't seem to make the news. But as soon as you get Medea, that's on every news channel in this country, and probably more than a few around the world. You're being played. You are being horribly played. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com. And WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, we have Michelle Obama. Now, most recently, she showed up in Los Angeles, and I don't understand why I didn't feel a disturbance in the force when that evil woman touched down and was on the ground here. But she attended the United State of Women 2018 conference and had some sharp words for those who did not support Hillary Rodham Clinton.
We're still at that stage where we're trying to figure out what it means to be women, and what we think of ourselves, what we think of each other. And, you know, sorry, in light of this last election, I'm concerned about us as women and how we think about ourselves and about each other and what's really going on. I mean, I think more about what is going on in our heads where we let that happen, you know? So I do wonder, what are young girls dreaming about if we're still there, where when the most qualified person running was a woman, and look what we did instead. I mean, that says something about where we are. You know, I forget everybody else. That's what we have to explore, because if we as women are still suspicious of one another, if we're still, if we still have this crazy bar for each other that we don't have for men, if we're still doing that today, if we're more comfortable with, if we're not comfortable with the notion that a woman could be our president compared to what, you know, then it is frustrating to see a lot of men blow it and win.
Here is my question here. She seems to talk as though the only people who make decisions or should make decisions in America are progressive women. I say that because she ignores men entirely except to criticize them at the last. And she ignores the fact that Hillary Clinton didn't really do that well among women. So only the only people who matter to Michelle Obama are progressive women who think anyone who wouldn't vote for Hillary is something's wrong with them. Now, for for Michelle Obama to wonder what it is to be a woman is strangely apropos, because there's still not so far-fetched rumors and indications that she may not quite be the gender she portrays herself as, but I digress. The other thing that's interesting is she talks about Hillary being more qualified, the most qualified. Well, was she not more qualified than Barack Hussein Obama in 2008? I think so. So this hypocrisy is pretty deep. Now, that's not the only area where she's wrong. She went to Mississippi to speak at the Jackson State University commencement about a law that was passed in Mississippi regarding religious freedom. So let me give you a little bit of background on that, because you have to understand what was going on surrounding that. So the BBC gave a biased, they're as objective as they can be for being progressives, but in this case they were not objective at all. But they did give their little spin on what happened in Mississippi back in 2016.
Just 10 months after the US legalized same-sex marriage, the fight for equality continues.
There would be actually a backlash against our state and actually against our faith, because this does go actually against the teachings of Christianity.
The governor of the US state of Mississippi signing a law allowing churches, religious charities and privately held businesses to decline services to people whose lifestyles violate their religious beliefs.
You're discriminating.
Unions say that means they could be refused marriage licenses, denied housing and turned away from needed care based on who they are. Individual government employees may also opt out, although the measure says governments must still provide services.
I'm going to have a hysterectomy, so I may not be able to have kids. So I want to adopt, and I want to adopt with my girlfriend. So, you know, it kind of just touches all the personal spots it shouldn't.
This law even defines a method in which if a clerk says, because of my religious held beliefs, I can't issue this license, they must find a system that will be able to issue that license to a same-sex marriage without delay or without interference.
North Carolina recently barred transgender people from choosing bathrooms consistent with their gender identity. Big businesses such as PayPal pushing back, cancelling plans to open a global operations centre in the state.
You know, I went to high school here at Ragsdale, where the locker room where we used right down the hall here and downstairs was separated for boys and girls. And that's frankly a policy and a standard that I think should remain.
The American Civil Liberties Union, involved in a federal lawsuit challenging the North Carolina law, says it's considering its next steps in Mississippi. Kirsty Johansson, BBC News.
So the interesting thing to me there is not that they passed the law, but the way that politicians want to tiptoe around simply doing the right thing. It's not popular in Mississippi to bend your will to the homosexual agenda, so you don't need to tiptoe around it. The fact that you are concerned about all this backlash from those who do not represent the majority or anywhere near a majority of people in Mississippi is kind of strange. But that's how progressives want those who are on the side of quote-unquote traditional values or American values to be. You know, you guys really aren't right, so you really shouldn't be confident about these things. That's how they want it to be played. And not surprisingly, they did challenge this law. And when they did, well, here's what happened. And this is ABC News in June of 2017 reporting on the results of the court challenge.
Down to a major court decision in Mississippi saying businesses and government employees can deny services to LGBT couples because of religious objections. ABC's David Wright is here. Have the details for us. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Robin. The Fifth Circuit's decision means that Mississippi could soon begin enforcing the so-called religious objections law, which would allow people in that state to deny services to same-sex couples on religious grounds. But representatives of the LGBT community say they're not giving up.
Even though the U.S. Supreme Court says same-sex couples have a constitutionally guaranteed right to get married, Mississippi's law says people who disagree have a right to refuse to serve them.
I'm afraid this is going to be yet another excuse to hate my wedding's July 4th when it throws that all into question.
This ruling, reminiscent of Indiana's controversial Religious Freedom Bill, which then Governor Mike Pence signed into law. That law allowed business owners to discriminate based on sexual orientation. The owners of this pizza place in Walkerton, Indiana, refused to cater a gay wedding.
I do not think it is targeting gays, personally. I don't think it's a discrimination.
Mississippi's law, House Bill 1523, passed at the State House after the Supreme Court issued its ruling on same-sex marriage, but was never allowed to take effect. Supporters of the measure say it protects the beliefs of people who insist marriage is between a man and a woman, and who believe a person's gender is determined at birth.
Simply all we're trying to do is say that people of faith have some protection from an overbearing government.
But opponents say the Mississippi law endorses bigotry, pure and simple.
Well, opponents of the law have several other avenues of appeal open to them. They plan to appeal immediately. There's also hope that maybe the legislature could change the law. That's what happened in Indiana, exactly, where Governor Pence signed into law some changes designed to address the LGBT community's concerns.
I often say I love my home state. You know, I was just there this past weekend. There are a lot of good people, great people in the state of Mississippi where I went to high school. My family has lived there since 1969. My parents are buried in the National Cemetery in Biloxi because my father served in the military in 3 wars. The LGBT community is not looking for special treatment. They're not looking for special rights. It's about equal rights, civil rights, human rights. Absolutely. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. You have a lot of love for your home state.
I do. But this is something that perhaps, like they did in Indiana, they could take a look at. But this wasn't voted on by the people. This was a House bill that was signed by the governor.
And we'll be watching it. Yeah. All right.
Robin Roberts, of course, is a very high-profile lesbian. And she gained sympathy by being, quote-unquote, a nice lesbian, as though there is such a thing, who is a cancer survivor, and therefore she is a sympathetic lesbian. Let me be clear about something. This is about special rights. You do not have the right to call yourself whatever you want. You do not have the right to change institutions that have been in place for millennia, and then let's go ahead and rename them and call them and change them into whatever we want because we choose not to follow the norms of sexual behavior. There's nothing normal about homosexuality. It wasn't that long ago when it was considered a treatable mental illness. Transgender is called gender dysphoria and is still described in the DSM-5 as a treatable mental disorder. So let's not get it twisted. They are asking for special rights. They're asking for special considerations in light of those parts of them that were not that long ago and in some cases are still currently recognized as mental illness. Are we clear? Now, despite all that, they did try to take this to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, we're not going to listen to this. And the reason being that nobody had been injured by the law. Therefore, there's nothing to hear. Now, at the time of its passage, Michelle Obama was at Jackson State University and basically tearing down the basic fabric of humanity and of America during a commencement speech.
Right here in Mississippi, just 2 weeks ago, how swiftly progress can hurtle backward. How easy it is to single out a small group and marginalize them because of who they are or who they love. So we've got to stand side by side with all our neighbors. Straight, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, Muslim, Jew, Christian, Hindu, immigrant, Native American, because the March for Civil Rights isn't just about African Americans, it's about all Americans. It's about making things more just, more equal, more free for all our kids and grandkids. That's the story you all have the opportunity to write. That's what this historic university has prepared you to do. So graduates, here is my challenge to you today. I want you to honor the legacy of our past by making your mark on the future.
She wants people to make their mark on the future by embracing every form of deviancy. She wants people to make their mark on the future by compromising what they believe. Let me help you out. Christianity does not stand with homosexuality. To be honest with you, Christianity has a very difficult time standing with Islam. They are not friends. They are not really compatible. People don't want to believe that. But Christianity, neither Christianity nor Islam, is supposedly very comfortable with sexual deviancy, even though the founder of Islam had his own problems. But the idea that you can put all these people together and say that the Obama idea of Americanism is what should prevail, and that idea of Americanism is defined by Michelle Obama. The woman is wrong. The woman is evil in her thinking. And for me, I really hope that she has the audacity to seek the Democrat nomination for president in 2020 so she can be exposed. In the meantime, she will continue to snipe at Americans, make light and mock their values, and basically try to substitute that which cannot benefit America as the prevailing thought. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, will be back after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us, also WDDQ, Talk 92.1, FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC Talk 107.5, FM in North Florida, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of the show. Has anyone else besides me figured out that the Me Too movement is really about me only with regard to leadership? Every woman who's out there as part of the Me Too movement is also part of a movement that has women saying me only as a leader, either in politics or in the media, entertainment or news. Let's take a look at a short list of the victims. There's Harvey Weinstein, who actually is the touchstone or the point of conflagration for the latest wave of this stuff. There's Matt Lauer, there's Charlie Rose, there's Russell Simmons, there's obviously Bill Cosby. You know, there's everybody on this list except Bill Clinton. Somehow he seems to always get a pass, and that dude has raped more women by accident than Bill Cosby drugged on purpose. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Bill Clinton is somehow sacrosanct. But this is about a systematic removal of men from positions of authority and to replace them with mostly progressive women. The whole thing with Michelle Obama coming out and asking women, what's wrong with you? Well, she's only talking at non-progressive women, and she's getting her amen corner of progressive women to shout hallelujah for her. So this is all this is about. Most recently, we have the story of a longtime Trump enemy or antagonist, Eric Schneiderman, Attorney General of New York.
There is shock today over allegations that a hero of the Me Too movement beat up two ex-girlfriends.
The apparent hypocrisy is what has many people shaking their head and looking at him sideways.
President Trump is reveling in the sudden downfall of New York State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman. Kellyanne Conway tweeted, "Gotcha." 63-year-old Schneiderman led the effort to shut down Trump University in 2016.
It is a scam from the start to the finish, including the fact that it never was a university.
Schneiderman was also a vocal supporter of the Me Too movement, taking legal action against disgraced producer Harvey Weinstein.
We have never seen anything as despicable as what we've seen here.
But two ex-girlfriends tell the New Yorker magazine that Schneiderman was a Jekyll and Hyde who hit them, often after drinking.
Living in New York City, we have to be prepared for anything.
Michelle Barish, a political activist and society figure, dated Schneiderman for 2 years. She is now claiming Schneiderman slapped me, open-handed and with great force across the face, landing the blow directly onto my ear.
My name is Tanya Silveratnam, and this is my story.
Another former girlfriend, author Tanya Silveratnam, says he called her his brown slave. He'd tell me to call him master, and he'd slap me until I did. This wasn't sexual play acting. He allegedly threatened both women if they spoke up with these chilling words: "I am the law." The New Yorker story was published at 6:47 p.m. Monday. Less than 3 hours later, he resigned. In the privacy of intimate relationships, I have engaged in role-playing and other consensual sexual activity. I have not assaulted anyone. I have never engaged in non-consensual sex, he said in a statement. Ronan Farrow, who co-wrote the New Yorker story, appeared on Good Morning America.
These women, one after another, were adamant. This is not 50 Shades of Grey. This was not in an area of gray at all in their mind. This was assault.
Assault? Isn't that a crime? So if he committed assault, where are the charges? How come he hasn't been arrested? Because they're lying. If this is what they claim it to be, then where is the investigation? Because if he committed a crime, simple resignation should not absolve him of criminal activity, should it? Well, there was no crime. These women are likely lying. MSN.com ran a story about the New York Attorney General's resignation amid these allegations, and in it, a woman who probably knows him better than the women who are accusing him spoke up. Mr. Schneiderman's former wife said she was taken aback by the allegations being leveled against him. Her quote, "I've known Eric for nearly 35 years as a husband, father, and friend." And this is Jennifer Cunningham, his ex-wife, who's also a frequent political strategist. "These allegations are completely inconsistent with the man I know, who has always been someone of the highest character, outstanding values, and a loving father." So what you want me to believe is that the woman who has known him for 35 years, been married to him, had a child with him, she doesn't know anything at all. And he hid this from her. And as soon as he got away from her, he became somebody else. And she's just blind to it, of course. Now, of course, she actually has such a good relationship with him that they still actually are in business and do consultations of some type together. And that, of course, leads the Me Too movement to say, well, see, she needs him for money and this, that, and really? Or it could be that she's the only one telling the truth. Well, all these women can't be lying. Really? Tell that to Brian Banks. Tell that to the Duke lacrosse team. The woman who ended up accusing them and finally got exposed, and she's in jail for murder. You can go on and on about the people who have lost time and reputation and everything else to a woman who simply lied about what she believes was done to her. Let's talk about Tawana Brawley. How far back do you want to go to find women who lie against men? Sometimes fictional men. This whole thing is always about the preponderance of allegation against men, never proof beyond reasonable doubt or really any doubt. Well, there's no doubt in my mind that these women are sincere. I could not care less. There's no doubt in my mind that they have no proof. And it's never about the facts. It's always about the feeling. They are adamant. So, what does that mean? He's adamant that he didn't do it. Is her level of adamancy, being adamant, greater than his? Is that how you weigh this out? Well, if I have enough adamant people on one side, that outweighs the number of adamant people on the other side. Is that how this works? That's scary. This is just misandry. And it is a tool of national destruction. They are looking to get women in control of this society by any means necessary. Oh, you're being extreme. Really? How come every time these men get taken down, who normally replaces them, especially in news media? And of course, the left is pushing to have more and more women in political office. So who do you think they're setting up to replace all these men who resign? But there's no conspiracy. We never have conspiracy. The left never did. Yeah. You know what? Try to wake up before you recognize this isn't a dream. That's our show. God bless you. God keep you. Be alert. And watch out for those for whom you care. Until next time, God bless.
Listening to Black Man Thinkin' with your host, Stan Levy. Join Stan midnight to 2 a.m. That's late Monday night into early Tuesday morning. And find him on the web at Black Man Thinkin' without the G. That's blackmanthinkin.com.